Good morning, everybody. How are you today? Happy Friday. Hope you are having a great week. We are going to be getting a little heavy today with our topic of shame and vulnerability. You're right, I have been reading Brene Brown again, hence this amazing topic, which I think we've sort of discussed before, but it never hurts to draw on again. So, who here feels shame, whether that's on a regular basis or maybe is that go to emotion when you're in some situation where things might be partially happening because of you or you feel somewhat responsible for the outcome. I know that used to be something that I would go to right away, like, oof, I don't know, somehow it feels like this is my fault. And because I feel guilty about it, I might try to overperform or over respond to help fix it. And then if things couldn't necessarily change, then I would go into shame, the I am bad, as opposed to I did something bad. Can anyone else relate to that example? I am going to talk about three things that we can do to understand the link between shame and vulnerability, because being able to have a better understanding and then work on what triggers you have can really help in eliminating your experiences of shame and allow you to be more open to the potentially scarier emotion of vulnerability, which does have that positive connotation, whereas shame has more of a negative connotation. So, in her book, Daring Greatly, Brene Brown talks about this link between shame and vulnerability and the fact that shame is often a fear based emotion, whether it starts with fear or it ends up leading to fear. There is this heaviness around shame. And unfortunately, it's that fear that stops us from being vulnerable. When we perceive that something bad might happen because we are feeling a certain way about a situation, we often come back from that situation as opposed to charging in, feeling open, and ready to express ourselves fully. I know I can relate to that. I don't know about the rest of you. So, if you, whether this is at home or at work, want to promote creativity, openness, connection, and innovation, when there is shame, that is very unlikely to happen. Vulnerability is essentially authenticity, and it allows us to step up, to be courageous and connected with other people. Whereas, unfortunately, um, when we have shame that dampens that ability to be vulnerable, we can't necessarily do this as well. It's harder to embrace our imperfections, those uncertainties, and the discomfort. And oftentimes we don't have the courage to step up and be our true selves. So, by understanding that vulnerability is this strength that we can tap into by overcoming shame, we can start to harness its power to cultivate a sense of inner resilience and use that to create deeper connections with other people in our lives. Has anyone ever had an experience where they've really been keen to set a boundary, for example? You know, somebody has been saying something or doing something upsetting, and you're going to speak up and say, in a nice way, hey, what you're doing isn't okay with me. But for whatever reason, you just don't, or it feels like you can't. And maybe that's because of the fear that you have around what might happen if you say something and state your needs to this person. So, being able to identify those places where you are experiencing shame or triggers that you have that lead you into a shame spiral can be really helpful to start changing that behavior. Secondly, we want to be able to identify shame and distinguish it from guilt. I alluded to this earlier, but shame is essentially that feeling of I am bad, whereas guilt is I did bad. Shame, because of that personalization of the emotion, leads to this spiral of disengagement, not caring. And when we experience shame at a young age, especially those formative years between 0 to 7, we can internalize this and create an inner narrative of being unlovable or bad or not good enough because of that, whether or not the experiences that we had were traumatic or dangerous, we can still make up our own story and we give it meaning to help make sense of the world for our little selves. So when we talk about shame, shame has this tendency to thrive in silence and secrecy, and it really holds us back from embracing who we really are because it's scary to put ourselves out there and experience that vulnerability. So this can manifest in our lives because maybe we have big dreams and goals, but we don't go after them because we're afraid of what might happen or what others might think or how they might judge us if we do. So, in order to move out of shame towards vulnerability and that authentic self expression, we need to shine a light on that shame and begin practicing some self compassion so that we can then move towards vulnerability with more courage. Some of the signs that you might pick up on if there is this tendency towards shame, whether that's at your workplace or perhaps at school or at home, things like blaming or gossiping, talking behind people's backs and saying nasty things about them generally isn't a healthy activity to do. I will not say that I've never done that, but I do catch myself more now. Name calling as well. Favoritism is one that might not be so obvious. Maybe that's being part of a family owned business and noticing that the direct relatives of your staff are treated better than those who aren't in the family. It could also be seen in harassment. There's definitely an element of fear in harassment for a lot of people, bullying or any kind of taunting, even if it's passive aggressive behavior that's not overt harassment. All of those things cultivate this culture of shame and can lead to dampening of all the great things that can happen when people can relax and comfortably be themselves. So, what we want to do now is look at how we can move through this shame so that we can embrace our imperfections and be a bit vulnerable when it's appropriate to do so. Vulnerability is this really important aspect of creating meaningful connections in relationships, again, to foster creativity and innovation and confidence in the workplace. It builds trust and empathy in our relationships with anyone and everyone. And by using honest and open communication, active listening, and being more vulnerable, we can enrich our lives by making those connections stronger so that we're closer to the people that we love. And that can include people at work as well. One of the things that I've sort of been thinking about around vulnerability are different behaviors that may incite shame because they require vulnerability. I would love to hear if any of you feel the same way about this, but the first one I have in mind is asking for help. So when you have to ask someone for help, that's usually admitting that you don't know how to do it yourself, or that you know someone else might have the skills or the abilities to allow you to do this thing together better than if you were doing it on your own. And I know sometimes asking for help can be perceived as a weakness because, at least in North America, our society is so focused on independence and forging our own path and things like this. But I really think that we're stronger together, and the collaboration as well as camaraderie that you can get by asking somebody else for help is this gift that you give to somebody else. And so that's how I've reframed asking for help lately, Because if you think about it, when someone asks you for help, doesn't it feel good to help them, especially if they're in need? Maybe you, by asking somebody else, will give them that same good feeling. Here's another one: admitting when you're not okay. This is something that I've been working on as well, being able to tune into my body and my intuition and not just breezing through my day, rushing around trying to get things done, but paying attention to, if there's this weird feeling inside my stomach or, tightening in my chest. And maybe that means that what I'm about to do is not quite what would help me or serve me the most. So being able to do that, even if you don't talk about it with other people, but admitting even to yourself as a starting point that you're not okay is pretty good. It's pretty important. Expressing how you feel could be step 2 from that, by telling somebody else that things are not going well with you, maybe that you do make a request for help or support in that case. And again, this requires vulnerability because our culture kind of frowns upon these things, admitting you're not okay, telling people about it, and asking for help. So, being able to do this, and I don't necessarily mean like flaunting it to the world, but maybe you have a trusted friend or family member and you feel comfortable talking to them, that would be a really good opportunity to bring up how you're actually doing. In terms of work, you can also ask for feedback. I think a lot of us who are more prone to going into a bit of a shame or guilt spiral don't love to ask for feedback because we're afraid of what the other people might say. I would encourage you to reframe this as feedback to help you be better the next time. So, not that you're failing by getting, constructive or negative feedback, but by giving you an opportunity to learn and to use it as a way to be better the next time. I heard somebody say recently that I've been saying failure, there's no such thing as failure, there's only feedback. And this person said, there's no such thing as failure, there's only incomplete success, which is also kind of fun. So when you get that feedback, maybe you need to do some nervous system regulation drills around asking for it and then after you receive it, but it can be so valuable, especially if you are on this path of learning and self-discovery and you genuinely want to do better the next time. Does anyone else feel like that could describe them or be a helpful thing to reconceptualize in their lives? Let me know. Another thing that you can do, and this is a really cool technique that is in NLP, is engaging in a conversation to understand everyone's side. And whether you do that in the moment, in real time, when other people are there, or you do it on your own, it's called perceptual positioning. You can generally come away feeling better after an interaction when you stop and consider how what you say could impact somebody else, and then pretending to be the other person, having the conversation from their end, imagining their values, their experiences, and then as this third party observer, looking at the two of you talking and just getting a sense of, maybe what they said didn't necessarily mean that, or maybe I overreacted based on my more detached position here in this conversation. And then lastly, I would encourage all of you to be practicing some kind of regular self-care ritual, whether that's nervous system regulation drills like we talk about here, maybe it's journaling or yoga or meditation. A gratitude practice is very much scientifically shown, has been, to reduce levels of depression. So that can be another really powerful way to overcome that feeling or those darker feelings that might be associated with shame. So if you would like to join me for a little bit of self-reflection, grab something to write with, or it could be, again, using your phone, or just think about it. I'd like you to think back on a moment where you felt particularly vulnerable. And it doesn't have to be a big event. Maybe it was just putting your hand up in a meeting at work, or telling your kid some bad news. Something that doesn't have to be huge or groundbreaking, but reflect back on that moment and think about the emotions that you were experiencing. Maybe there was some fear, maybe there was some guilt, maybe shame, maybe there was some nervousness or anxiety. When you think about those emotions, how did you then respond to those feelings? What behavior or action came about as a result of that situation? In NLP, neuro linguistic programming, this framework is all about the how of our brain and the how of our neuro pathways firing. So it breaks down kind of our strategies in how we respond to certain triggers. So I'm encouraging you to look at, okay, the trigger being something, some external event. What emotions did you experience? And then what behavior or action did that lead to? Just by breaking it down, we can start to then change different aspects of that experience for you. I would also like you to reflect on any insights that you might have gained about yourself and your relationship with vulnerability, either from that event or from anything that I've mentioned so far in this training. Have you had any shifts in your beliefs or perceptions as a result of this? For me, I think the biggest part would probably have been knowing that I can reflect on what I'm feeling and then pause, do something, some kind of drill to help me calm down. And then that will oftentimes lead to a different behavior. So I don't have to follow that well worn path towards a behavior that I've done for years and years. I can insert some new inputs, change the firing pattern, and then end up doing something totally different. And lastly, I would like you to consider how you can apply this principle of vulnerability to your daily life moving forward. Is there an action or a change that you might be inspired to make? I would love to hear about it if you're open to sharing. Maybe it's considering someone else's point of view during a conversation and actively doing that even in the middle of the conversation, or perhaps prior to a conversation that you know you're going to have. That would be pretty cool if you could then show up and have this different mindset with ideally focusing on the outcome that you want, as opposed to this, oh no, it's all out of my control attitude, which I know a lot of us do tend to have, particularly when stress is high. I wanted to go back to a more personal story about like perceiving shame at a young age. So that's something that I'd say I've experienced a lot, this interpretation of being bad, and for whatever reason I don't necessarily remember the events, but through my own work having NLP done on me using a technique called timeline therapy, it's been really interesting because we can clear using timeline therapy. It works with the unconscious mind, which is why you don't have to have a particular event remembered in order to benefit from it. So you like travel back along your timeline, and part of the clearing of negative emotions involves clearing the big five plus shame. So anger, hurt, fear, sadness, guilt, and then shame. And the idea is that when we have this early life experience, this creates sort of a web from it, so that any later life experience pulls you back into that triggered moment, and that kind of amplifies the feeling that you're experiencing. So using these techniques of NLP, we are able to reduce those big emotions, the negative emotions, and in future, obviously we can still feel emotions, but we don't feel them in this inappropriate or unwarranted way like we may have before. And I will tell you from personal experience, this has been huge for me in, and it's again, it's an unconscious technique. I don't have to actively think about, should I feel shame or guilt right now? It's just like, oh, okay, there's maybe a tinge of it there, but it's not overpowering, it's not overwhelming so that it stops me and messes up the rest of my day. So, one of the things that I have found really helpful is this ability to shift negative emotions and change core beliefs. It's so liberating. I just wanted to tell you because I was stuck on this hamster wheel for so long of trying to prove that I wasn't bad. And oftentimes, this would be through perfectionistic tendencies, exhausting myself to get things done, ignoring the signs that my body was giving me, and feeling really uncomfortable with the idea of like resting or doing nothing because this could be perceived as lazy. And to me, that connotation is lazy equals bad, and I am bad, but I'm trying to prove that I'm not bad. And these are all of the things that have historically prevented me from feeling safe enough to be vulnerable. That's why I'm telling you this story, even though I have no idea who's going to hear it. And that's okay. If you need to hear this today, then I hope that it finds you. But I will say it's been a huge weight off my shoulders. It's really freeing, and being able to share this with other people is something that I'm really passionate about. It's such a joy to see other people start to engage with the world in a way that feels true and authentic to them from a place of worthiness or enoughness. So now we will do a quick recap. We talked a lot about shame and vulnerability throughout this training. Shame leads to fear, and it can create this loop so that fear is this underlying current in the shame cycle. We talked about how to recognize signs of shame and how to distinguish it from guilt. So the shame being I am bad, whereas the guilt is I have done something bad or I have been something bad, but it's not as personal. And then lastly, learning how we can start to be vulnerable and embracing our imperfections by looking at our triggers and examining our behavior so that we can sneak little what am I looking for? Circuit breakers is the word into that pattern and change the output. Just like that fun loop for our nervous system. Input, decision making, output. If we change the input, the rest of this pathway, by virtue of it being a pathway, also has to change. My last thing that I'd like to share, if you are local to the island, is that it's still available. Spots are still available in my workshop tomorrow. That's Saturday, May 25th. It's happening in Nanaimo at Wildwood Health. If you like, you can find the links to join in the Facebook group, or I'll post it here. Otherwise, I hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and it's crazy. Next week, we're already into June. Summer's coming, you guys. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and we'll talk soon. Bye.